As we look back over the first two series of The Pain of Progress, we have tried to present an accurate insight into the tremendous impact the wars of our past have had on the world we live in today. Nowhere in our history do we see a greater representation of that impact than during the Second World War. It was during this brutal conflict that we saw the rapid development of fledgling technologies and the invention of new ones, with the goal of defeating the enemy on both sides, and ultimately adapting them after the war to peacetime uses, which have gone on to change the world in ways that can never be fully measured. We have also tried to show and remember the sacrifices in human lives to pay the price for the luxuries and conveniences we enjoy and often take for granted today. As we continue our journey through history, we will look at the many painful sacrifices and struggles of the people and organizations that have shaped our societies and gave us the rights and freedoms we now enjoy, and how they transformed how we live in our modern world. What better place to begin than the early years after the end of World War II and the formation of NATO? The North Atlantic Treaty Organization originated in the trauma of World War II. Human costs of that war motivated Europe to remove the barriers to economic integration that had prompted warfare among the nation-states since the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. The devastation of Western Europe also inspired the United States, as a major victor in that war, to abandon its traditional isolation from European political and military affairs. It was the awareness on both sides of the Atlantic of the threat that Soviet-led communism posed to the future of Western democracy, which prompted and accelerated these fundamental changes. Despite the claims that NATO was an exercise of America's reach after World War II, it was Europe's initiative, not that of the United States, that opened the way to NATO. Led by Britain's Foreign Minister Ernest Bevin and France's counterpart Georges Bidault, Western Europeans feared that their efforts to collaborate in a future defense organization could not succeed without American involvement, and their economies could not be rebuilt without massive American support. It was also believed that an American commitment to counterbalance the communist adversary was needed to cope with the aggressive Soviet Union. On March 4, 1947, the Treaty of Dunkirk was signed by France and the United Kingdom as a treaty of alliance and mutual assistance in the event of a possible attack by Germany or the Soviet Union in the aftermath of World War II. In 1948, this alliance was expanded to include the Benelux countries in the form of the Western Union, also referred to as the Brussels Treaty Organization, established by the Treaty of Brussels. Talks for a new military alliance, which could also include North America, resulted in the signature of the North Atlantic Treaty on the 4th of April 1949 by the member states of the Western Union plus the United States, Canada, Portugal, Italy, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland. From the time the North Atlantic Treaty was signed, it was not fully implemented until the Korean War necessitated the establishment of NATO as the official organization that would carry out the implementation of the treaty's conditions by means of an integrated military structure. This included the formation of Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, in 1951, which adopted the Western Union's military structures and plans. In 1952, the post of Secretary General of NATO was established as the organization's chief civilian, an international diplomatic position which serves as the chief civilian servant of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as well as acting as NATO's spokesperson. The first Secretary General of NATO to take office was General Hastings Ismay. That same year, NATO saw the first major maritime exercises, known as Exercise Mainbrace, as well as the accession of Greece and Turkey to the organization. The peace conferences in London and Paris in 1954 saw the rearmament of West Germany on its entrance into NATO in May of 1955. This was a major factor in the creation of the Warsaw Pact that same year, which saw a NATO-style union between the Soviet Union and other Eastern European countries. The alignment of nearly every European nation into one of the two opposing camps formalized the political division of the European continent that had taken place since World War II and became known as the Cold War. This alignment provided the framework for the military standoff that continued throughout the Cold War from 1947 to 1991. There were doubts over the strength of relations between the European states and the United States, along with doubts over the credibility of the NATO defense against a prospective Soviet invasion. Doubts that led to the development of an independent French nuclear deterrent and the withdrawal of France from NATO's military structure in 1966. The newly democratic Spain joined the alliance in 1982. Since its founding, the admission of new member states has increased the alliance from the original 12 countries to 30. The most recent member state to be added to NATO was North Macedonia on the 27th of March 2020. NATO currently recognizes Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, and Ukraine as aspiring members. An additional 20 countries participate in NATO's Partnership for Peace program, with 15 other countries involved in institutionalized dialogue programs. The combined military spending of all NATO members constitutes 70% of the global total. Members agreed that their aim is to reach or maintain the target defense spending of at least 2% of GDP by 2024. After the fall of the Berlin Wall in Germany in 1989, the organization conducted its first military interventions in Bosnia from 1992 to 1995, and later in 1999 during the breakup of Yugoslavia. During this time, the organization sought better political relations with former Warsaw Pact countries. This approach was successful, with most of these countries joining the alliance between 1999 and 2004. Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, requiring member states to come to the aid of any member state subject to an armed attack, was invoked for the first and only time after the September 11 attacks, after which troops were deployed to Afghanistan under the NATO-led International Security Assistance Force. The organization has operated a range of additional roles since then, including training a new Iraqi army, assisting in the counter-piracy operations, and in 2011 enforcing a no-fly zone over Libya in accordance with the UN Security Council Resolution 1973. The less potent Article 4, which merely invokes consultation among NATO members, has been invoked 5 times, following incidents in the Iraq War, the Syrian Civil War, and annexation of Crimea. The first post-Cold War expansion of NATO came with German reunification on 3 October 1990, when the former East Germany became part of the Federal Republic of Germany and the alliance. As part of post-Cold War restructuring, NATO's military structure was cut back and reorganized, with new forces such as the Headquarters Allied Command Europe Rapid Reaction Corps being established. The changes brought about by the collapse of the Soviet Union on the military balance in Europe were recognized in the Adapted Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty, which was signed in 1999. The policies of French President Nicolas Sarkozy resulted in major French military reform, culminating with their return to full membership on 4th April 2009. Which also included France rejoining the NATO military command structure, while maintaining an independent nuclear deterrent. Between 1994 and 1997, wider forums for regional cooperation between NATO and its neighbors were set up, like the Partnership for Peace, the Mediterranean Dialogue Initiative, and the Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council. In 1998, the NATO-Russia Permanent Joint Council was established. Between 1999 and 2020, NATO incorporated the following Central and Eastern European countries, including several former communist states: the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Albania, Croatia, Montenegro, and North Macedonia. In Afghanistan, as in Bosnia and Kosovo, allies found that military power is no longer enough to assure peace and stability. During the Cold War years, Allied security had entailed the defense of North Atlantic allies. Now, the definition of security has radically expanded to include the individual's freedom from the violent extremism bred by instability and nation-state failure. Much of the world's attention in 2011 was focused on the crisis in Libya, where NATO played a crucial role in helping to protect civilians under attack from their own government, as mandated by the United Nations. The level of violence used by the Libyan security forces against pro-democracy protesters was such that the international community agreed to take collective action. Indifference was simply not an option. The 21st century will not be all about peace building, however. With Russia still outside of NATO, there is a criticism of NATO that it helps in reinforcing the infrastructure of a two-way competition for the leadership of imperialist powers, as seen during the Cold War. Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its aggressive actions against Ukraine have been a sobering reminder of the importance of NATO's core task, collective defense. Since its founding in 1949, the Transatlantic Alliance's flexibility embedded in its original treaty has allowed it to suit the different requirements of different times. In the 1950s, the alliance was a purely defensive organization. In the 1960s, NATO became a political instrument for détente. In the 1990s, the alliance was a tool for the stabilization of Eastern Europe and Central Asia through the incorporation of new partners and allies. In the first half of the 21st century, NATO faces an ever-growing number of new threats. But as the foundation stone of transatlantic peace and freedom, NATO stands ready to meet this challenge, while always remaining true to the memory of the millions who lost their lives on both sides of World War II, which led to NATO's formation. They were the people who suffered the pain of progress.
I have a dream today. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.